your executives need to be involved. They can't just sit back and let the field and the BIM team and prefabrication figure it out themselves. BIM is the direction that you're going, and it's time to or get off the pot, essentially.
Jeff Drews has been a BIM VDC manager for an electrical subcontractor for over 5 years and is now the president at BIM Technology Management based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's passionate about BIM and what it can do for an organization when implemented effectively. He is not afraid to push the boundaries of what can be done, thinking outside of the box as far as how is it being used and looking for efficiencies wherever they can be sustainably implemented. Jeff has successfully built departments and processes from scratch and stepping into existing chaotic BIM departments and turning them around. In this episode of MEP Masters, we're going to learn from Jeff Drews as he shares some of the critical lessons he's learned from implementing BIM from start to finish in a variety of different organizations. I'm David Gabriel, host of MEP Masters, and I'm excited to share this episode with you. This episode is brought to you by BIM Technology Management and Evolve. BIM Technology Management is a BIM consulting firm that helps customers realize their full potential with BIM from start to finish. And Evolve helps trade contractors improve productivity, profitability, and growth by aligning their teams on a single software platform. Jeff, welcome to the show.
David, it's an honor to have me. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. Yeah, I'm excited for this one. We've got a really great topic for our audience today. So before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and some of the cool things you're doing at BIM Technology Management?
Yeah, personally, I have 17 plus years in the industry. I started out in architectural and structural, and then I moved into the manufacturing side of things for a little bit. And then after that, I worked for an electrical subcontractor, all before starting BIMTM.
And what does BIMTM do?
Yeah, BIM Technology Management is a group of consultants. We work for contractors, architects, engineers, and building owners. We help to implement BIM, or if you're trying to get over a hump, or if you have some kind of goal that you're trying to achieve, we can help with that. That's project augmentation, training and support, BIM management, content development, and being a change agent for your company.
I know with our Evolve customers, BIM is, it's different to a lot of different companies, and it can sometimes be a beast trying to execute from start to finish, right? It's a little bit of a journey to execute it, right?
Oh, absolutely. My partner and myself have been working with electrical subcontractors doing coordination with an emphasis on prefabrication for the last 6 years. We've been working very closely, helping them to implement VDC departments, and we've learned many lessons along the way.
That's awesome. Yeah. So obviously, you have a lot of great experience, and you've been very successful at implementing BIM at all different types of company sizes and modern companies, older companies. So you've got a lot of experience there in the MEP space. Let's talk about some of those lessons that you've learned. So let's jump into that.
Yeah, I think the big problem is a lack of structure, and it manifests itself in 3 areas. Unclear role expectations around BIM, unclear metrics or the benefits of BIM, and not having standards equals huge problems in a company.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That lack of structure, does that happen because, MEP contractors are moving to BIM because of now it's more of a requirement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time many companies are moving into BIM, it's because they had a contract and it said you have to do BIM. So then they plunk somebody out of the field, and now they're a BIM guy. No structure, no standards, just a BIM guy doing BIM.
Right. So they've almost, reactively for that specific project, right? They've moved to BIM, and I think, what you're seeing in the industry is, well, that's not going to change. We're going to have more and more projects saying BIM is a requirement, and if not only the future, it might be every single project is a BIM requirement, right?
Oh, there's a good chance of that. Yeah.
So it's gonna, when it comes to executing profitably and even just estimating effectively so you can win the deals, there's BIM really truly needs to be, you can't just wing it, right? Like, you got to actually have some structure here.
Right. A defined vision, a goal. What does the company want to do with BIM, and execute it, not just throwing stuff at the wall because it's a requirement and seeing what sticks. We've learned many, many lessons along the way. For me, the number one lesson learned is having unclear role expectations around BIM.
I think almost in any type of organization, right? Even outside of MEP space, if there is unclear roles, that can be very frustrating for the individual in that role. It can be frustrating for the boss. It can be frustrating for peers. And it's pretty common in new growing industries to have those types of roles. So it's one of those tedious things that you're almost like, wow, do I really have to spend time defining this? And but it seems like there's a lot of consequences if it's not defined. Is that correct?
Oh, for sure. BIM is kind of that general term, and I think everyone has a different definition for that. So I guess I'm going to use this just as a moment. Revit is not BIM. BIM is not Revit. Revit is a tool to do BIM. BIM is the process of BIM is the process of building information modeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the definition, but it's even though it
Exactly.
is, right? I think the challenge is companies are having to move to Revit, right? And they're thinking we got to do BIM. A lot of them are reactively moving because it's a requirement. They're buying Revit and they're checking the BIM box. We're doing BIM, right?
Yep,
That's
exactly.
part of the problem. But before we go into best in class process and you know really establishing these roles, what's the big pain that somebody would experience by not defining the role?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, so first, I think the BIM techs or the Revit operators, they often get way too much responsibility thrown on their plate. So depending on the company, without having that defined process of is what is your PM's role? What is your field person's role? What is your um, prefab manager's role, or even your estimator's role for that matter? If you don't define that, typically your BIM guy gets all that responsibility thrown on it because it's in his title. So just remember, the BIM is the process, and usually your BIM technicians are more Revit operators than anything. So, like I said, they're used as the easy scapegoat. They're used as an easy target for blaming.
Yeah, because since it's unclear when somebody makes either an error or something goes bad, it's just you can just point to that person. Oh, it's
Yep,
this guy.
yeah, BIM did it. BIM did it. But you got to remember, BIM or the Revit operator, they're just a tool. They're a tool in your toolbox, and similar to your hammer, you don't yell at the hammer if it made a hole in the wall. It was the person who directed the hammer. So BIM is very similar. So you need to define that process of who's making decisions. Is it your project manager? Is it your guy on the job site, or is it all on your BIM operator?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that, I think it comes, unclear, uh, metrics, unclear process, right? When it's not clear with the BIM, what is BIM? What's the purpose of BIM? We don't really understand what's the goal, right? That's probably part of how it manifests, as well as there isn't really clear process of how am I supposed to interact with this individual, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone who's been involved with BIM knows that BIM can be very expensive. And typically there's a big upfront cost. And typically firms have zero idea really what they're getting into. Um, and then your project manager might get a little gun shy and pull back before BIM really has time to show its full potential.
Yeah. It almost reminds me, I know we've talked about this analogy, but Google Maps, where when you go into Google Maps, the first thing you do is, you type in, all right, where am I going? Right. And so it's almost like you set a destination, right? And then a path is documented, right, in Google Maps. And then from there, you might figure this out at the beginning, or before you even start, but it's like, what vehicle am I going to take?
Right.
Right.
Am I walking or driving?
Yeah. Am I walking? Am I driving? But a lot of that is dictated by, where am I going? What path am I going to take? What's the vehicle? Right. And it's almost
Right.
like goals, strategy, tactics. Right. And the challenge is, a lot of this, if the goal is undefined, like, what's the metric? Right. How am I going to understand? And it doesn't have to be a hard metric every time. It could be like qualitative,
Right.
but how do I know if this is successful?
Yeah.
Right. Where do we ultimately need to go? Right. What's the path we're going to take? And then what's the vehicle? Right. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about here. Like,
Absolutely. And those goals could change project to project. It might be we just want to satisfy a coordination requirement, or we want to prefab the heck out of this building. We want to do everything. Or we might want to just do a little piece. And without having that defined goal before BIM even starts, it might change the way things are done a little bit.
yep. Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's like, I mean, the challenge, it's almost like you got one of those, I mean, you've got a whole bus of people that you're riding with, right? And it's like, because that's the big, the company. You've got a lot of people that it's critical in order to move this direction. Everybody's rowing in the same, or maybe rowing is a better term, right? So it's like
Right.
they all need to be rowing in the same direction if we're gonna be efficient, fast, effective, etc. And if it's unclear what direction we're going in, right, which is the goal, strategy, etc., then we're not going to go anywhere. You're going to have people rowing in one
Chasing your
direction
tail.
saying, I don't want to do BIM, right? And we see that with companies. Field is resisting BIM, like, I don't care about this. Like, oh, I know how to do it, right? And a lot of times they do. I mean, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. And if we
Right.
don't consult the field, right, like that's where we're missing out on valuable perspective, right? 'Cause that's what we need to affect change, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. If we don't involve the field from the beginning and let them know what the goal is of all this, they might resent us and they might push back and say, well, you guys are just trying to take our job away from us or something like that. And they really need to just think of it as, hey, Milwaukee Tools just rolled up and gave you the shiny new tool for your job or whatever it is. Maybe not Milwaukee Tools, whoever. Sorry. Maybe somebody rolled up with a shiny new toolbox and gave it to you, and it's BIM. So how do we use it? How do we use BIM to our advantage?
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think, I mean, at the end of the day, BIM is, like you said, it's expensive, right? And if we,
So
yeah,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
stop you there. So BIM can be expensive. BIM may have a higher upfront cost, but you should see the results through the whole duration if you give it time. It's gonna save you all kinds of money in the long run. I mean, it's allowing for prefabrication and quantity takeoff. It's allowing opportunities for robotic total station, field verification with 3D scanning. It increases your scheduling capabilities. It identifies major conflicts before they ever happen. So yeah, there's a higher upfront cost, but you would never be able to do those types of things without BIM.
And, in your experience, do you feel like, the companies you work with, like the majority of them understand that? Probably the person writing the check understands, hey, there's going to be an ROI on this, right? Like that's what they're hoping for. But across the company, do you think the majority of people understand that, hey, BIM is ultimately going to help us save money in the long run?
That's a great question. I think most times companies fight it to begin with. So the guy up at the top is having to write a check for $30,000 or whatever it is, and they're like, "Holy crap, we really have to do this?" So they don't really get behind it at first. They see it as a job requirement. They're forced to do it, and then after a while, when they've been forced to do it continually and continually, they kind of take a step back and they look at it and they say, "How can we get more out of this money that we're putting into it?" And that's where I think companies really start to develop these processes around BIM. They start looking at prefabrication and utilizing robotic total station and starting to dial in some actual standards instead of just throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah. And I think that's what the best companies are doing. I know you're working to help a lot of companies execute that level of a process. And so they're out there, right? And I think where this now is probably the perfect time where, maybe 5 years ago, people were just getting BIM to begin with.
Right.
Now is the perfect time, if you execute some of this, you might be able to gain some traction against, different competitors.
Right. And I mean, the competitors thing, that's a great point. This isn't going away. BIM isn't going away. It's going to continue to be a requirement, and the requirements are probably going to get more strict. So you start creating a plan around it, start developing processes, start having goals, and start getting more money or
Mhm.
start getting more bang for your buck with what you're already having to do.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I love it. So let's talk about like some practical things that our listeners can do in order to really create more clarity around, what was it, roles, right?
Yeah.
Metrics and process, right? So maybe let's start with roles. Like what's some practical things um that our listeners can do to better define the roles, or maybe even when should they be defining these roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Typically, I mean, there's two ways to approach this. You can define roles for an individual project, or you can define roles within your company. So if we look at, uh, let me take a step back. Sorry. So part of this would be not letting resentment ever happen in a company. So um, we want to get our field foreman involved early on
Mm.
in their project. Nothing should be a surprise. We want to give them ownership in the process. Um, and that way their expectations can't be any clearer. We need them to know that they aren't being replaced. Like I said before,
Mm.
it's a shiny new tool. And by doing that, we can set regular meetings in our projects. So if you want to meet with them once a week, kind of start flying the model together, bring up issues, ask their opinion, then they'll really feel like they're involved in the process and they can really start to see the benefits of it. Like, oh, holy crap, I didn't know that was going to be an issue if I ran that conduit through this area. Then they'll have
Mhm.
those aha moments and they'll really take a step back and be like, oh, wow, this stuff does work.
Wow, that's really good because even in visiting some of our evolved customers, I'll see that there is a little bit of a divide, and in actuality, both teams need each other to be
Absolutely.
effective.
And that's a good point too. So no matter how you do things, there's always going to be some foreman out there or some field guys who are going to feel that resentment. So how do you approach that situation? Your manager or your executives need to be involved. They
Mm.
can't just sit back and let the field and the BIM team and prefabrication figure it out themselves. You can't let these issues fester. They need to be addressed head on before it becomes a part of the culture. They need to know that BIM is the direction that you're going, and it's time to shit or get off the pot, essentially.
It's awesome. Yeah, I agree. 100%. It's moving in that direction, and if now's the perfect time, but 5-10 years from now, it may be too late, right? Like that's
Exactly.
kind of the moment that we're at. I mean, we even see it with a lot of our different customers implementing BIM and some of the creative processes that they're building. It is now is the time. It's not too late, but 5-10 years from now, man, that's gonna be tough.
Yep. And we
But
can't have these separate teams either. It can't be your field team and your BIM team and your prefab team.
yep.
So part of kind of breaking down those walls might be getting your BIM guy on the job site,
Mm,
having him go out there for a regular meeting once a month, once a week, whatever it may be. Because having that guy walk the job site, guy or girl, walk the job site, they're going to start to see things that they wouldn't have known otherwise. They're going to start to learn things from their foreman. And then they're going to grow those relationships, because you're not going to grow the relationship quite the same through a Teams meeting or something like that. But when you're out on the job site and the foreman can literally point at the ceiling and be like, that's why you can't do that, then you're going to start to build that team relationship.
yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And that's especially important as we get the new generation coming in. I mean, even if you think about it, 5-10 years, I mean, we're already seeing some of the Gen Zers enter the workforce, right? Like 5-10 years from now, you're going to see a lot more of them, right? They don't have that level of experience. So being able to have somebody from the field or somebody who, has a lot of experience in the field, being able to show and work together is going to be a huge advantage.
Oh, for sure.
Awesome. All right. So what about like metrics? Let's talk about that. What can and that's kind of that goal, right? So like how should companies define goals? And do we need hard goals? Is it okay to have soft, squishy goals? Or like what are your thoughts on that from a metric and tracking standpoint?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. This is the one I struggled with the most. The metrics are so hard around BIM. Sometimes it's a gut feel. Sometimes it's just a feeling. Did we go into the postmortem and everyone felt good about what we did, or were the numbers good but everyone walked away feeling like this job was a failure? I think setting small wins is the way to really build. So if your goal is to do 5% prefab on the job or something like that, and you only do 4%, you still have to look at that as a small win. Was it better than the last one?
Mm-hmm.
Did you do 2%? And then at the same point, maybe there weren't as many prefab opportunities on a job,
Yeah.
but maybe we came in under budget of what we thought it was going to take from a BIM coordination standpoint. So those metrics can't be like a hard metric every single time. That's kind of what I mean by that gut feel.
Yeah. And I love what you said, like measuring growth, consistent growth. That's key. It's funny, even just like with the investing world. I think Warren Buffett's like my stock, my investment strategy is don't lose money, right? Just continue to grow, right? Like consistently, even if it's 1%, 4%, 30%, right? Like
Yeah.
just keep growing. Don't
Build on
stop.
those small wins. Just build on them. We don't have to change the entire department overnight. We just want to do a little bit at a time.
Now, what about with those metrics? Like we should be tracking them though, even, as we're looking at growth. If the goal is 5%, we hit 4, and the year before it was 2%. Well, that's great growth. But no matter what, we shouldn't just not track it.
Oh,
Or
absolutely.
something, right?
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy, so usually with my timesheets and that kind of thing, I'll keep track of how long did it take us to populate an area, how many square feet was it, how long did coordination take, how long did our prefab drawings take, and from one job to the next, as things become more of a muscle memory, you should start to see things are taking less time to populate. Things are taking less time to coordinate. Obviously, that's kind of job specific because it might be design issues or other things happening, but you should see a trend in the right direction.
Yeah. And finally, like, what about like process, and who in the organization really owns defining the process of how we're going to get to these goals, right? Give it our best shot of how we're going to get to these goals, along with how do we get these teams working together? Who owns that process or strategy?
That's a good question. I like to call it a change agent within the company. So you have all these different departments that work together. Your BIM manager might be your change agent. It might be your prefab manager, but somebody needs to have these constant meetings and communication between the different departments with a grand vision of what everyone's trying to do. Because if somebody doesn't have that vision, you're going to have all these different individual visions with people going in different directions. And then nobody's going to really ever feel good about what you guys are doing.
And so, I mean, let's say we have an organization that hasn't really defined that person. I mean, does that come from the top saying, okay, we need to give this guy, bring on somebody that is kind of that change agent who's gonna, and do they can they have the entire authority to say, okay, we need this technology? Like, what does that look like? And what level do we need it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes the top doesn't even always recognize that a change agent's needed. And I think someone in some kind of managerial position can just take the bulls by the horn and make sure everyone's on the same path. So pick up the phone, talk to the guys in the field. Hey, how'd that last job go? What can we be doing different on the next one? Go walk out into your prefab shop and figure out how things have been going. Could we do things better? And just make sure all the balls are in the air and things aren't slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, no, that's good. So it's like, don't feel like you have to wait for somebody to tell you, hey, this is your job.
Exactly.
Like you can just go ahead and start making sure the team is working together and we're moving forward in this direction.
That's a good point. I mean, in my roles, I don't think anyone's ever told me like, hey, you're the change agent. No, I've been a BIM manager before, but I've advocated for change and became that change agent within the company.
I love that. And you're really, especially in this industry, like this is a critical change. And like, you think of the business, like 20 years from now, like, Jeff, you probably, there's certain organizations, like they wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't play that part. You know what I mean? Of like taking the bull by the horns and really aligning these teams, getting the process in place, defining the roles, and like, hey, this is the goal. And, even if we're a little bit shy of it, as long as we're consistently growing, we're in a good spot.
I like to think so.
Yep. Wrapping up, can you tell our listeners where you recommend they start, or what is one step they can take?
Right. So in the beginning, we kind of talked about the main problem being a lack of structure. So I think the one thing every company needs to do is define structure, define standards, document everything. And that's something that BIMTM can do, or you can find someone else to do it for you. But you need a change agent in your company, somebody to drive that structure.
Love it. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Jeff for coming on the podcast. And thank you, listener, for listening to MEP Masters. Any questions or want to join? Email us at marketing@evolvemep.com. And once again, thank you to BIM Technology Management, and I'll see you next time.